These agents are unleashing violence against people across our country. And I have one final picture as I close. I want to remind the American public of Stephen Miller. There is probably no single person in this government has done more damage and more harm to people across this country, immigrants and U.S. citizens, in the terror that is happening across this country than this man right here. And it's our job as a House, a Senate, and a united Congress to hold him responsible for the crimes that are happening to United States citizens. As a country, we have to do better. And with that,
The screen is already on. No introduction. No transition. Just a voice, steady, controlled, familiar. I have never instructed anyone to alter those numbers. That never happened. It plays clearly. No distortion. No interruption. And for a few seconds, nothing else happens. No one speaks. No one moves. Standing just a few feet away, Ted Lieu doesn't react immediately. He doesn't cut it off. He doesn't look toward the committee. He lets it continue. Long enough for the statement to settle. Long enough for the words to repeat themselves in the minds of everyone in the room. Then he pauses it, freezes the frame. The image remains on the screen mid-sentence, mid-expression. And then, without raising his voice, he asks a single question. Do you still stand by that statement? At the witness table, Stephen Miller leans slightly forward. There's no visible hesitation, no glance at notes, no visible uncertainty. Yes, one word. Clear, direct. And now it's on record. Locked in, under oath. And that's the point where everything starts to shift. Because what follows isn't built on opinion or interpretation. It's built on timing, on sequence, on whether two separate moments captured days apart can coexist without contradicting each other, or whether one of them begins to collapse under pressure. The hearing itself didn't begin this way. For nearly an hour, it followed a predictable rhythm. Questions were asked, answers were given, policy details were discussed, budget numbers referenced. Nothing unusual, nothing that would draw attention outside that room, until the focus narrowed. One date, February 9th, a televised interview, a direct question, and a very specific answer. Lieu brings it up carefully, not rushed, not dramatized. He reads from the transcript, word for word, making sure there's no confusion about what was said. Have you or anyone in your office ever been involved in changing or adjusting official reporting numbers? Then, the answer. I have never instructed anyone to alter those numbers. That has never happened. Lieu doesn't comment on it, doesn't challenge it immediately. He just repeats a portion of it. Never happened. And then asks again, is that still your testimony today? Miller nods. Yes. And with that, the position is fixed. No ambiguity. No room for reinterpretation later. Because the wording is absolute. Not to my knowledge. Not directly. Not within certain contexts. Just. Never happened. And that's what makes what comes next more difficult to explain. Lieu doesn't argue. He doesn't interrupt. He reaches for a small remote control. There's a brief pause, not dramatic, just noticeable. The kind of pause where people begin to pay closer attention without fully knowing why. The screen changes. At first, it doesn't look significant. A conference room. Standard layout. A table. Several individuals seated. A timestamp visible in the corner. Different date. February 3rd. 6 days earlier. Same voice. Same person. But a different setting. No cameras for broadcast. No interviewer. No audience beyond the room itself. Just an internal discussion. And then the line. We need to adjust the way these numbers are being presented. The tone isn't confrontational. It's measured. Routine. Like a procedural suggestion. Someone off camera asks a question. You mean change the reporting method? There's a brief pause. Then the response. Use the alternative calculation. It's still accurate. It's just presented differently. Lieu pauses the video, doesn't rush past it, lets the words sit, then repeats a portion of it, presented differently. Now the contrast is visible, not explained, not framed, just present. One statement says it never happened. Another shows a discussion that sounds closely related, and the room begins to react. But not all at once. First, it's quiet. People processing. Looking from the screen back to the witness table. Then subtle movement. Phones being picked up. Notes being checked. Whispers starting. Because now there's something to reconcile. 2 moments. 6 days apart. Different contexts, but overlapping implications. And that's where many would expect a response. An explanation. A clarification. But Lieu doesn't stop there. And that's what shifts the momentum. He continues, without raising his voice, without changing tone. Another clip. Different date. Same room. Same individuals. But something is different this time. The tone. There's more hesitation in the voices, more caution in the phrasing. A question is asked carefully. If this comes up, how should we describe that earlier discussion? There's a longer pause now. Not just a moment. A gap. And then the response. We didn't have that conversation. Lieu stops the video immediately. No replay. No emphasis. Just silence. Because the implication doesn't need explanation. Up to this point, there's room for interpretation. Differences in wording. Differences in framing. But this introduces something else. Acknowledgement. Or the absence of it. Lieu turns slightly. Still composed. Still measured. On February 9th, you said it never happened. He gestures toward the earlier clip. On February 3rd, you discussed it. Then toward the second clip. And on March 8th, you said to deny it. No raised voice. No added commentary. Just sequence. Date. Statement. Date. Statement. Date. Statement. And when those are placed side by side, it becomes harder to separate them. Because now, it's not just about what was said. It's about when it was said. And how consistent those statements are over time. Miller doesn't respond immediately. There's a shift at the table, subtle but noticeable. An attorney leans closer. A brief exchange. Papers move. And for the first time since the hearing began, there's a pause before an answer. Earlier, responses were immediate, confident. Now there's a delay. And in a setting like this, even a short delay carries weight, because it suggests something has changed. Not necessarily the facts, but the situation. Take a moment and think about what's happening here. Is this about wording, or is it about alignment? Because Lieu isn't presenting an argument, he's presenting a timeline. And timelines don't rely on tone. They rely on order, on consistency, on whether each point connects cleanly to the next. And when they don't, that's where questions begin. Lieu turns back toward the committee. His tone doesn't change. Still controlled. Still deliberate. He requests formal review. References specific statutes. Doesn't overstate. Doesn't dramatize. Frames it as something that requires further examination. The motion is seconded. Quickly. Without extended debate. And that's when the atmosphere in the room shifts. Not gradually. Noticeably. Conversations begin overlapping. People speak at the same time. Phones are already out. Messages being sent. Because the moment has moved beyond a simple exchange. Now it's something that could extend outside the room. Into review. Into analysis. Into follow-up. And Miller. Sits still. Not reacting the way he did earlier. Not answering immediately. Just there. Listening. Waiting. And that contrast becomes part of the moment. From certainty to pause. From immediate answers to measured silence. If you've been following this closely, there's one detail that stands out. It's not just what was said. It's how many times it was said. Because the February 9th statement wasn't isolated. It wasn't a one-time response under pressure. It was repeated. In multiple appearances. Consistently. With the same wording. The same certainty. And that repetition matters. Because it reinforces the position. It strengthens it. Until something challenges it. And when that challenge comes with documentation. With recorded material. With timestamps. it becomes more difficult to dismiss. Not impossible, but more difficult. The original claim was clear, simple, definitive. That never happened. But now, there are at least 2 recorded moments that suggest something more complex. Not necessarily a direct contradiction in every detail, but enough overlap to raise questions about how terms are being defined, about how actions are being described, about whether adjustment and alteration are being treated as the same thing, or something different. And that distinction becomes central, because if they are the same, then the statement becomes harder to support. If they are different, then the explanation needs to be clear and consistent. The hearing doesn't resolve that. Not fully. It doesn't provide a final conclusion, but it shifts the focus from a general discussion to a specific sequence of events. And once that sequence is established, it becomes the reference point for everything that follows. So the question now isn't just what happened in that room, it's what happens next. Because moments like this don't stay isolated. They get reviewed, they get analyzed, they get revisited. And sometimes they lead to further action, not immediately, but over time. If you've made it this far, drop your thoughts below. Do those statements align, or do they raise more questions than answers? Because the timeline doesn't stop here, and there's more in those recordings than what was shown in that moment. Stay with this, because the next breakdown goes deeper into what was said and what wasn't. And once you see the full sequence, the picture becomes a lot clearer, or a lot more complicated.